Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity.
Sheila Shupp, thank you so much for being our guest today on People in Transition. I'm so looking forward to this discussion.
It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you, Bob. Thank you for the opportunity.
Sheila, when you were younger, what did you want to be, and I'm going to use air quotes here, when you grew up?
I would say as a very young child, I wanted to be a teacher. In fact, probably all the way through, I actually went to college for that purpose. But by the time I made it to college, I actually wanted to be a band director.
Well, that's a shift from where you're at now. So what were kind of the transition moments that you went through both in college and then when your work life started?
Sure. I was faced immediately my first semester in college with the realization that if I was going to be a band director, I would be putting in 60, 70, 80 plus hour weeks. And for some reason that didn't click with me prior to that. But once I got in there, I put two and two together and decided I needed to do something different, had a love for literature and for learning. And so within my first year, had actually transitioned into an English degree with the intent of getting a secondary teaching certification, which I did. I did it in that order. I'm actually married before I'd even finished college. And then we ended up moving about the time that I would have been stepping into a teaching role. And so I honestly never stepped into teaching. I had other opportunities that came my way. I managed a boutique law firm in the Dallas area and ended up having our first child. And then 17 months or so after that, our second child. And so I ended up staying home with my children for 14 years. And then next came the next big transition. Mom was not needed at home quite so much. And so after 14 years at home, actually stepped into residential real estate. 6 years in real estate. I was a top producing agent in one of Century 21's top producing offices worldwide. But quite frankly, my last 2 years in, I knew I needed to do something different. I just didn't know how because the income was so good. And honestly, I didn't know how to make it from point A to point B. And so I spent 2 years really just sitting there and trying to make real estate work those last 2 years until I finally began a transition into human resources.
Sheila, after 14 years working the real job of this world, which was being a mother, how was that transition from that experience to going into real estate? What did you do to prepare yourself for it? What did you find in terms of the receptivity of the marketplace in terms of you coming back in after 14 years?
A couple of items stand out to me. And the first one was, quite frankly, I was mush And I don't know that people could tell, but I seriously could not speak in complete sentences. And it was a process of adapting and adjusting to being out in the world again. And it's not that I was sheltered or sequestered. The experiences were so different staying at home, being with two very young children and raising them. So that's one piece of it. As far as the receptivity, my goal was to not let anyone know that I hadn't been in real estate. I mean, why would they do business with me if they thought that I was a rookie? I wouldn't have done business with myself. And I was always surprised with people who were friends when I was starting out who actually asked me to serve them in that capacity. And I just thought I wouldn't use myself. I'd hire someone with some experience. But as far as receptivity, there was one thing that I knew, and I actually remembered a story that a friend had told. This would have been back when I was in my early 20s, and he said he owned an office supply business, and meaning office type furniture and equipment, and he served a major hospital system in the panhandle of Texas. And he said, if I wear a suit and a tie, I can get anywhere in that hospital that I want to get into, whether I'm supposed to be or not. And he specifically named the operating room. So my thoughts were, quite frankly, if I put on heels and maybe a pencil skirt or a sheath dress, then people will think that I know what I'm doing and that I'm supposed to be there. And that, I will say, if you're remembering back to Dumbo and his feather, my heels and my dresses were my feather.
After 14 years of just saying, no, I mean it now, little wonder that it was difficult in terms of those sentences.
Well, and can I tell you, that's funny that you bring that up, Bob, because it was not even a week or two in. One of our commercial agents within the office stopped me, asked me what I was doing prior to that. And I shared with him, and he said, stay-at-home moms make some of the best agents. He said, they don't know how to take no for an answer.
Good reference material there for you, that is for sure.
Yes.
Sheila, what are some of the areas that you've seen people that are in transition, whether that is college to their first job or between jobs? What are some of the struggles that you've seen them go through?
I'm going to speak first, and I'll say because the job search is probably freshest on my mind because that's been the most recent. But I think I can speak across the board in saying just keeping up your courage. And when discouragement hits, getting out of it.
What is keeping up with your courage? What does that mean in the job search?
It can be very daunting. It can take lots of time. It can take not just time as far as out of your day, but it can take a huge length of time. And so I remember someone saying this was in real estate. They spent 1 hour every day encouraging themselves. And I do think whether we're in transition or not, we probably would do well if we would spend 1 hour every day encouraging ourselves. That job search is such a big unknown. When is this going to end? Where is it going to lead to? Oftentimes you're doing it out of a sense of need. And so you have that pressure coming up against you as well.
Sheila, if you are looking for a culture of some variety, maybe you're looking for a more laid back culture, or you're looking for maybe a more entrepreneurial, or you're looking for that hard charge and, kind of take no prisoners kind of a culture. How do you think that you should find out what the company culture is in the company that you might be interviewing with? And follow-up question to that, I guess, is, let's say everything else is great. Great money, great location, everything's great, but the culture is not what you're looking for, and you're offered the job. What do you do?
Boy, that's tough. And I would say first and foremost, my answer would be run away from it, run, don't walk. But that's easy to say if you're not at a specific point of need. And I do have a friend who within HR, she's our CHRO of an organization, but she has very specifically kept herself mentally, thinking in front of herself. She always has 2 to 3 jobs out there. And so it might be where you have to weigh that and say, is this something I can do for a period of time to grow and to develop? But my first response would be to say, walk away from it if culture is not a fit, because it can make getting out of bed, maybe not waking up, but getting your feet on the ground and heading that direction every morning can be incredibly challenging if the culture is not a fit. As far as how can you see that, I do think, Bob, that I would encourage someone to consider all of their senses, your sight, your touch, your smell, sounds, all of those things. And when I say that, what I'm trying to say is look on the internet, see how they're perceived, how they're presented on the internet and social media, their website, and then assuming that there's a physical location into which you can go, as soon as you plant your feet in there, everything speaks, whether it's the people or whether it's the cleanliness or whether it's the conversations. And just use all of your senses and really take it in. It's not hard. I mean, I even think when we shop, we can leave a store and say, management must be very good here because I can tell people enjoy working here.
Sheila, I know that you work with a number of hourly employees currently. Is finding a job somehow different for that hourly employee than others?
Gosh, in the current job market, I would say it's easier. First of all, there are just so many more options out there, and you don't necessarily have to go in with skill. I mean, there's so many at that level. There are so many companies that say we're willing to train anyone who would be a good fit for us and has some skills, basic skills to do the job.
What about resumes, Sheila? If you could, because you have seen lots of them, if you could make 2 suggestions to help people make their resume better for that resume to stand out, what would those 2 suggestions be?
The first 2 that come to mind are have a handful. I'm not saying 1, I'm not saying 2, and probably not even 3. Have a handful of people comb through it and give you feedback and make sure that you have absolutely no errors on it. The second piece to that I would say, Bob, is do a little research online as far as what applicant tracking systems look for so that you can make sure you're using fonts, you're using font sizes, that you're handling spacing and layout in a manner in which applicant tracking system would actually be able to read it.
For some who might be on here that might not know what an applicant tracking system is, can you describe that a little bit?
Sure. I'll just call it a holding tank for applications that come in. It would be linked to your profile, and it does take your information in and essentially has artificial intelligence read your resume. And so you want it to be readable. You want your keywords that are the keywords in that job to stand out. And so it's really a quick way to take human hands off of resume perusing or researching and be able to go through a mound of resumes much more quickly.
Sheila, how have you coached someone who is dealing with the shame or guilt that they might experience when they've lost their job?
I will say that I personally was part of a mass layoff that occurred during COVID, a few months into COVID. And it can be challenging. You don't quite know how to put that on your resume, but I just don't think there's any room for shame. And, things happen. And so you just have to look at that and say, this happened. And what do I do to move forward? And again, part of that we talked about earlier, it's spending an hour a day encouraging yourself. What a good thought if we could actually do it. I do think that is a season where you really do have to get up every day and encourage yourself and say, I am capable and I am able.
We talked about company culture. What if you just want to find out some information about a company that you're interviewing with? How do you go about doing that research?
Again, I would do as much as I could hands-on, actually looking and seeing. Anytime you could speak to someone, and that could be honestly as simple as reaching out to someone on LinkedIn and would you be willing to talk with me for 15 minutes about the culture at your organization? And I have found that people, when you ask in a professional manner, in a gracious manner, if they're able to, they will.
So Sheila, making any type of job transition can be challenging at best, but making a major career pivot, say to a completely different industry or going from sales to HR, can be off the charts. And then you lay on top of it all the stuff that we're dealing with on COVID. What's the 3 or 4 things that you would suggest to someone who is making that major career pivot? What should they do?
I think first and foremost, you need to craft your story and craft it well so that it's believable. And why are you doing what you're doing? And why are you capable of doing that? So crafting the story, I think, is of huge importance. Branding yourself, essentially, what is your image? What do you look like in that profession? And make sure that you are coming across in that manner in every conversation and in every, face-to-face or, phone conversation, virtual conversation, that you're coming across according to your brand.
And what if you determine that your personal brand, and I'd be curious how you define that personal brand. What do you do if you find out that personal brand is not as positive as you'd like it to be? What do you do?
The challenge that I think I see with that, Bob, is that people don't necessarily know when their brand isn't attractive. And so I think the first thing that you might have to do is get real and get vulnerable and ask people, what do you see when you look at me? And be ready for any type of feedback. You are up against so many different applicants out there who could be more qualified. I think the thing that you have to do is you're looking for that person people who like investing in people. And those are the people who will say, man, I'm willing to give this one a go.
Sheila, I don't know if you went through this ever, but what happens if in your job search you come to an impasse and you're just unsure about what the next step should be? And in fact, you even begin to roll backwards. What should you do when you hit that impasse?
That's funny that I actually hit that one. After COVID, I did well for the first month after my layoff. And then a month after, I felt like I was being buried alive because I knew how to network before COVID. I did not know how to network after COVID. And I will say, I called my business mentor. I actually texted him and said, I need to meet. I didn't explain why. He's typically not available quickly. It typically takes a little bit of time. He responded very quickly, and we actually had a phone conversation the next day. And I don't know what he did, but I felt like he lifted me up out of the dirt. So you've come to an impasse. And I will say I hit a point too, Bob, where I felt so desperate that I would have been willing to take on any job that was thrown my way, whether it had been in HR or not. But I do think that you really have to be sure of what you're doing so that when you feel unsure, you can go back to your why. Why am I doing this? And you can stay true to that course. Picture it like pinball. People will know if you're playing pinball, it will come across. So you really have to know who you are and what you're working towards. And, your avatar, you have to know your avatar. Who am I? What am I aiming for?
You talked about networking. Any coaching, any suggestion in terms of networking during these COVID times?
We are open here in Texas now. And so I can go back and do it the way that I did it before. But I will say one of the things that I began doing, and I found people receptive to it, was I would just reach out to individuals through LinkedIn and message them and say, this is a shot in the dark, but would you be willing to give me 15 minutes of your time so that we could talk about, whatever, and I would be specific, the culture at your organization. And I had very good responses from those, made some good connections. But my preference, and this was my business mentor says, Sheila, you just do well when you're in front of people, when you're face to face. And so that's his strategy for me always, is just get face to face and it will come.
Sheila, how do you deal with the stress of being unemployed and looking for a job? How did you cope with that emotion that gripped you some nights when you said, I'll take anything?
There's just nothing like having a support system around you. And so it is just spending time with people. People can be fuel in your tank, and I should say the right people. I'm a learner as well. And so for me, it was working towards a certification. That was a huge piece of it. Another part of it actually was networking with people who were in the job search. I actually got brought into a group of people whom I considered to be pretty high-level executives when I was going from real estate into human resources. And I felt very privileged to be invited into their group. We were looking for jobs. And so just having ideas, people bouncing ideas off of one another. Have you considered this? Have you considered this? Have you been to this course? They taught LinkedIn, your LinkedIn profile in this manner, and it's something different and I believe profitable. So all those type of ideas would come from that type of setting. And the fun thing about those are new relationships for me that even to this day I'll get a text from someone from that group. Or a couple of weeks ago, I got one of our people, she'd been looking for a job for well over a year, maybe a year and a half or so, and she reached out to thank me. So some really neat relationships that came out of that, and specifically some professional relationships that will occur for the long haul.
How did you find that, or how, if I were looking for a new job, might I be able to find a group that's kind of like that?
I can't even remember how I stumbled on that. I don't think anyone told me, but I didn't even realize that that world existed of people who are helping people job network. And, I think it would be the way we do anything these days. And it would just be Google it, pick your city, Fort Worth, job search, or something similar to that. Just play around until you find those groups that are going on in your area.
Anything that you would share with people that during this pandemic time, or maybe some continuing, that work remotely, how do they stay engaged? How do they stay a part of the company? Any thoughts on that?
To me, it would really depend on your leadership, quite frankly, and do they want to be engaged? Because it's hard to create something out of nothing. But there are certainly virtual opportunities abound, and people are much more familiar with that. I can't speak to your part of the country, but we did have people here who began to meet outside of work hours and have small groups that would get together just so that they could have some face time together. And then I do think one of the other pieces is in those virtual meetings, if there's just a pause at the beginning, how are you? I'm not talking about professionally, what's going on in your world? And give those opportunities to, hold up the new puppy. We got new puppies. I'm getting absolutely no sleep, or, the baby's sitting on the lap, or those types of things. Just really giving permission to your teammates to be real.
Sheila, let's say a friend of yours calls you up and says that they've lost their job because their company is going out of business. They just couldn't withstand the rigors of COVID. What's the 2 or 3 things that you're going to tell them to do right away?
I'm going to tell them to create a networking plan. Just begin with the people that you're going to speak with. I would encourage them to create a list of 15 companies that they would like to work for. Focus on making connections within those companies, sparking conversations within those companies. And then I think the last piece is to really assess themselves and have someone with some visual and communication savvy assess themselves digitally. How is your digital presence?
In order to accelerate your search, you need to be comfortable in engaging people in networking. And you've talked about that several times already. But I'm an introvert. I feel uncomfortable in that networking arena. What should I do?
I have the privilege of working with youth, a part of our team, our young people, high school aged. And I can't tell you how many have never had a job interview before, and they come to me and they are shaking. They might start out well, and about the third question in, poor things, they just start shaking. And I just stop them and I look at them and I say, it's a conversation. This is just a conversation. That's all an interview is today. It's all it's going to be for the rest of your life. And so even introverts have friends and they converse with their friends. And I do think that if you just take the word interview out and begin to think of it as a conversation, it changes everything. And I'll give you an example or a story. When I was interviewing, this is my first job in HR with Michael's, the arts and crafts retailer. And I actually interviewed with a CHRO and then 3 VPs within the organization. And it was so interesting, Bob, because every single one of the interviews, these were executives, long time career. And every single one of those interviews were completely different. And they were according to that individual's personality. And so when you're networking, you just have to be yourself. You have to think of it as a conversation. They're either going to like you or they're not. 1 in 10 people I've been told won't like you. So just assume that they're one of the 10 and don't care. Just go in and be yourself. And the way I look at it is if it's not a fit for them, then it's probably not a fit for you either. It's okay to have a no from an organization.
No just means you're one more closer to that yes.
You're exactly right.
Can doing volunteer work help someone who's looking for a job? And if so, how do you use that volunteer work to your advantage?
I don't know if everyone thinks like this, but I heard someone say, if someone will volunteer and do it well, just think of what they would do in a job where they actually got paid. And so if everyone had that mindset, wouldn't it be beautiful? I'm not certain that they do really realize the value of volunteering. But one of the things that it does, especially if you've been laid off, it gives you a place to put your energies and resources, outside of just head-on job searching all the time. So it does give you an outlet. The reason I am in the current job that I'm in is I actually offered to volunteer my time for the organization and said, hey, let me just come and volunteer. I'll build my HR resume and serve you in some capacity. And it actually ended up being a part-time role, and which led to full-time we began this full-time conversations within a month. So you just never know when that opportunity, if it's industry specific to what you're looking towards, you just never know when it could be mutually beneficial.
Sheila, how does your health impact the success or lack of success that you might be experiencing as you go through transition? How does health impact that?
Okay, I'm going to say something that I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say, but it was said to me. And so these aren't my words. I'll just start with that. I was actually meeting with someone in Dallas, and they provide transition services they hire them to help their laid off team members with transition. And he said, well, there's nothing worse as far as job search goes than a boring middle-aged man. And so that's not specifically speaking to being a middle-aged man, Bob. What it's speaking about is how are you coming across? How are you coming across? Mm-hmm. And so if you aren't engaging in an interview, I mean, you're showing up in an interview, my experience when I'm interviewing people, I'm seeing their best, and it's not going to get better from there. And so if you're not alive, if you're not engaged, if you don't look like healthy, mentally, physically, it comes across. And I do think it's a red flag as just someone who's interviewing, because again, it's not going to get better after the interview or after hire.
And how do you do that in today's environment that 70% is a statistic that I just read of the interviews are being done via Zoom? How do you come across alive, engaging? Any tips, techniques that you'd suggest?
Well, and it's been a while since I've been in that seat. And so there are definitely things you can look at, like how you should dress, how you can position yourself within the screen. Again, a good internet search will tell you the best way to show off there. But I do think, in fact, I remember he's the CHRO, or he's the chief people officer for a massive international accounting firm in Dallas. And I got to see him, Tony Bridwell is his name. I got to see Tony in a presentation. He was actually leading a virtual conference. And in his session, he stood up and he was, I don't know how you describe it, almost like a boxer before the match, was kind of going from foot to foot. And so definitely came in with a lot of energy. I'm not certain if you would want to do that in an interview, but I will say I had a young team, like a 14-year-old young man who showed up like that on a virtual interview that he and I had. And I was impressed. I thought this kid has the stamina for the work that's demanded of our team members. So in some way, shape, or form, it's that whole, when you're in sales, they would tell you, and you're making that cold call, smile. They can see you smiling. Even though they can't see you, they can see you smiling. And so I do think if you could start out maybe in some way, shape, or form rested before you get to that call, and just as alert and strong feeling as you possibly can be, that would be best.
Sheila, any books or other resources that you'd recommend to someone who is going through their own transition?
I have one that actually, it was your 29th episode, Mac Pritchard was on, so not that far back, and he recommended the 20-minute networking meeting. Highly, highly recommend that book. In fact, someone, when I had been in my job search, had actually given us notes specifically from that book, and so had that information before Mac even presented it, but to get it in the book form and really in full was a huge value, money well spent. I do have a recommendation, though, when I am talking to people, is I wouldn't call it a networking meeting. People don't necessarily like the taste of the word networking in their mouth, and so I might call it an information meeting or something else other than networking meeting when I'm asking for those meetings.
Sheila, if you want to have our listeners remember 3 things as they go through transition, what are those 3 things that you want them to take with them?
That it does have an end. So, live that day with the end in mind. Have a plan and work your plan. And again, have people around you who really would be real with you. And, when you look at me, what do you see? People who will really speak to that, whether it's in regards to your presence, your personal presence, your digital presence, your resume, people who will speak the truth and help encourage you get to your best place or the best version of yourself for the job market.
I've been doing transition management stuff for years and years, and I have yet to have someone not find that job. And I really do believe there is a job out there for everyone. It may take a while, but I really do believe in terms of that. So thank you. Those are 3 great ideas. Sheila Shupp, thank you so much for your caring and for your sharing your experiences, your wisdom, and your motivation for our listeners. Something that is needed in today's environment, and I appreciate your taking time to be with us today. Thank you, Sheila.
Again, it's my pleasure and my privilege, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully, or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.